reincarnated in you because I have not, wow, you went back to get to my credentials. I almost pretty much shut the door on broadcast, except for Zoom, because I feel very comfortable on Zoom. Why? Because you are all broadcasters in this moment, whether you know it or not. So it makes my life much easier because I'm literally always on camera, and having done television and having done radio, I'm comfortable doing it. So I'll just tell you a little trick that I do. I look at the camera. I never look at the screen. But when you ask me a question, then I will look at you. So there's a big difference. So that's why. It's just a little trick of the trade. Try it and see how your Zoom life improves. I wanted to just quickly get a sense of, I did not put together, I did not put together a slide deck. I have done that sort of thing in the past, but really I'm here tonight to try to provide to you the information that you would like to acquire, because you yourself have said, I've always wanted to write. And literally, that's why I named my online teaching, which I don't do anymore. I should say I've learned to conserve my time for my own writing or for my writing students. So I tend to teach through other outlets. If you're interested, you can find me at lindalowen.com and send me an email, and I can send you links to all the things I do. So just a quick show of hands. Who here is just, you're just curious about, publishing, and you're just sort of here, just information gathering? Put your hand up if you're just merely curious. Okay. Now, who here? Okay, so we'll call the majority of the room merely curious. Who here would really love to see something that they wrote in print and are willing to put the effort in, no matter how discouraged I may make you tonight? Okay. Okay. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because I just want to say this, and I'm not going to go into the craft of writing a lot, except that I will spend the first 5 minutes saying, I think that the greatest crime perpetrated upon contemporary literature was J.K. Rowling saying to people, oh, I didn't really write. I just had a baby in a baby carrier and I put her on a table at a coffee shop and I sat and I wrote. Okay, maybe that really worked. You know what? I got to be honest. I've never read the books. I've listened to Jim Dale on the audiobooks. It's because she constantly does things like she'll use a noun and then she'll use it as a verb. She has these little ticks in her writing that literally drive me up the wall. By all rights, Harry Potter should not be successful. It breaks every rule about structuring books. However, that's neither here nor there. But what it has left us with is the idea that you can just write. And yes, I will simply say this. You can just write for your own pure pleasure and edification. And if it makes you happy to sit and write, I would never criticize you. The issue becomes when you want your writing to be read. And the fact of the matter is, most of us think about what we want to write, but we don't always think about the reception that it will have on the other end, or how to shape it so that it delivers to the reader the experience that she or he wanted from the work. And we know in fiction that there is, all right, I'm not going to say there's more craft. There's just as much craft in what many people now call creative nonfiction. So nonfiction is anything like a grocery list, or, hey honey, I'm on Zoom right now, but I've written you a note on the refrigerator door, and then you whatever, that's nonfiction. Every day we write nonfiction. We write reports. We or write academic papers. That's all nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is when we use craft to persuade, or to convince, or to create something in our work that compels people to move forward. I mean, I could talk to you a lot about story theory, and I think I might be teaching at Wells Learning by the Lake this summer. Anyway, there's a million things that we could go into about how you craft story to get readers engaged. But the short version of this is that if you want to be a published writer, in this day and age because of so many influences that we encounter. And it's been said that on an average day, there are 35,000 inputs that we receive, and that the brain automatically filters what we will and will not pay attention to. One of the things is that storycraft is critical, whether you're writing fiction, nonfiction, or creative nonfiction, or your own memoir. Why? Because you need to learn the tools of engagement so that your reader will be aboard with your storytelling. And I've devoted the last 3 to 4 years really studying story structure. And I've learned a lot because most of us, when we write, we kind of write by the seat of our pants. We're just writing out of, I want to tell this story, but we don't really think about the ways in which people accept story. So I tell it very simply, story is just pattern. And there is pattern recognition on the part of the reader who's delighted that they see a pattern in the reading. And then there's pattern interruption. And you know, when sometimes something's boring, but then you interrupt the pattern, it's like, ooh, exciting and innovative. And then pattern is reestablished again. That's really only what story is. But understanding how pattern is formed and understanding the arcs, the story arc, all of that is part of storycraft, and all of that is part of creative nonfiction. So I'm here to talk about the ways in which you might go forward with writing your own story. And I will be absolutely bold as brass and tell you the easiest thing in the world, if you're going to start writing, is to take a class with me called Micro Memoir. I'm actually teaching it at a place called Writers in the Mountains, but I think am I teaching it this summer? Did I talk about teaching Micro Memoir at Wells? The gist of it is, I'll just say this, and it works for beginning writers and it works for writers who've been working for years. Micro Memoir is stories of 200 words or less. There are a fair number of literary outlets online that will print this. And when you can craft a story, a complete story arc with conflict, beginning, middle, end, character or characters, narrative, all of that, if you can do that, then you can write. Why? Because you are really paring down your prose to the most basic elements. What I had published in the New York Times was a 100-word tiny love story. And that was, again, a story about how my honeymoon was so disastrous with my husband that I did not think our marriage would survive. And because all the signs were there that we were headed for disaster. And I wrote this in 100 words because 30 years later, we're still married. So all of this to say, it is possible to get yourself published in the New York Times. Start reading Tiny Love. Forget Modern Love. How many here have read Modern Love or have seen the series on television? It's great. Do you know what the odds are of Modern Love? I mean, there's actually a 66-page document in Google Docs, depending on what groups you hang out with. I hang out in a lot of writers groups. So there's a lot of ins and outs of learning how to write a modern love essay. But it is possible for you to publish, and I have taught I've taught this micro memoir tiny love story class through various outlets, and 2 of my students have gotten their short stories published on the New York Times as a tiny love story, 100 words. We're all capable of doing it. So anything short of that, everything else takes a little bit more. So it's a process, but I'm going to talk to you today about that process. So very briefly, we now live in a world in which self-publishing is an option, and self-publishing is actually quite a viable option. Now, I know a lot of people say, yeah, but I want the agent, I want the book deal. And I will talk about the agent and I will talk about the book deal. We'll talk about all those things that happen, talk about the concept of the big 5 publishers, 2nd and 3rd tier publishers, how all this works. But the gist of it is, I have a conventionally published book coming out. Supposedly the publisher says April 1st. I'm also on the Publishers Weekly end of things, and I see how supply chain is affecting publication. I'm sure you were aware, I mean, not that you were out at the bookstore buying books, but the publishing industry really dried up when we hit COVID. And I saw a slight lag in the books that I review. Before COVID hit, I was on average reading a memoir a week and reviewing it. And what I do is, I mean, we're talking 200, 300, 400-page books, which I read, and I read every page. And people say, oh, that must be so much fun. Have you ever picked a book off the shelf and read 3 paragraphs and you knew you didn't want to read it? Well, imagine, if you will, having to read that book, whether you wanted to read it or not, because it's sort of like being back at school for an English assignment at Wells with Bruce Bennett. You got to read that book and you've got to write a 200-word paper. I know. Anyway, that really is what I do. So now I can see that the publishing industry is back in full force again, because I'm getting, again, on average, a book a week, which sounds fun. Maybe not, maybe so. Anyway, so I read a lot of creative nonfiction, and I read not only, when we say the big five publishers, Simon & Schuster, Random House, Hachette, but I also read smaller publishers. Like I'm reading a book right now from a company called Story Press. They're out of Canada. And I'm reading a book which I'm delighted by. It's called Growing Old, Going Cold. A 75-year-old woman who lives off of the coast of Toronto on Toronto Island, swims in every weather. And it's a book that she's written about cold water swimming. There are theories that if you immerse yourself daily in cold water, it will improve your longevity. And the fact that she has gotten a book deal and she's publishing this book at that age is wonderful. So I'm delighted. Previous to that, I read another book, and I won't mention it because I didn't give it a good review. And I realized that I probably shouldn't have even said this woman's name, because technically I'm not supposed to reveal the books that I review, and they are anonymously written. So I read these books. I know what the marketplace bears. I know what is being published right now. And so that's a little bit of what I'm here to talk about. How is it that somebody gets their story from in here on the page, whether it's written by hand or on the computer, and then it's published either online or in a magazine or in a book? So I will start with, so let me talk about the three ways you can do this. You can choose traditional publishing. And traditional publishing means the publisher takes your story, and if you're lucky, it used to be they'd give you a good advance. I know a woman who got a book deal in '94 and she got $60,000. That doesn't really happen anymore, unless some book deals number into the seven figures. A woman named Lisa Taddeo wrote a book called Three Women, which is about the sex lives of women. It was compared to Gay Tillese's Honor, Thy Neighbor's Wife, and she got a 7-figure book deal because it was bid upon by, I think, 3 publishing houses. Anyway, for the most part, that won't happen for you. And traditional publishing means that typically you have a manuscript. If it's fiction, it's complete. If it's nonfiction or memoir, you can actually write a book proposal and sell your idea of your book, as long as you can prove that you're a good writer. And what you do is you do 3 sample chapters, you write a synopsis, you write a marketing plan. There is a whole world of information about writing the book proposal. I know people who sold it on book proposal. A good friend of mine just sold a book called Writing That Gets Noticed. It's going to be, she has 6 months to write the book, and she's going to have it published by New World Library. It's a writing craft book. Anyway, traditional publishing. The hallmarks of traditional publishing are you may get an advance, which is an advance on royalties that the publisher expects, and you will not pay for anything. Keep this in mind, because a lot of people who absolutely know nothing about publishing don't understand that an agent won't take money from you. A publisher won't take money from you. They are there to acquire your work. They have ownership and control of it. And then they put the money down to get the book edited, to get the book in print, and to sell the book and to distribute the book. Because book distribution, you can have a great book and it can be sitting on a shelf somewhere. Book distribution is critical. So that's traditional publishing. Then there is self-publishing. Self-publishing means you, for one reason or another, don't want to go through the gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers would be trying to find an agent, and you do have to solicit agents. You have to send them a manuscript or sample chapters. There's a whole process for that. And you don't want to do that, and you don't want to, because just because you get an agent doesn't mean you're going to get a book deal. The agent has to convince editors at publishing houses to take the manuscript and to champion it And then the editors at publishing houses in these meetings, in these marketing meetings, they have to promote the book. Sometimes a publisher won't take an editor's recommendations because the sales team says, sounds interesting, but we don't think we can get it on the shelves of bookstores. This is the thing. Most of us think about writing our story, and we're so focused on telling our story. But the reality is, your story, and you say, well, it'll appeal to all sorts of people. In publishing, publishers are just like any other business. They're interested in ROI, return on investment. So they need to know who is going to buy your book. So in the publishing industry, have you noticed how there was there's Girl on a Train or Gone Girl, or all of a sudden there's all these girl books, right? Why? Because publishers know they can sell books that are similar to books already being sold. The book that breaks barriers, the book that creates new spaces on the bookshelf, is not the book that the publishers want. How many of you have read Reviving Ophelia by Mary Pfeiffer, which came out probably 30 years ago? She wrote a book about how young girls are very bright and outgoing and engage with boys and equally with teachers and all of this. And when they get to about 10 or 11, all of a sudden they shut down. I know I'm talking to many women who were at a single sex college called Wells. However, Mary Pfeiffer talked about this, and it was like Ophelia, because she would sort of, dampen her light because of Hamlet. So she wrote this book, and she found an agent who absolutely loved the book. But the agent, and that's the thing, when you're trying to sell a book, you want an agent who believes in what you've written, because they have the vision and they have the contacts. And I actually interviewed Mary Pfeiffer, so I know this story. She was rejected 37 times, 37 different publishers, until the publisher 38 picked up the book, and the book was a huge bestseller, and it created a whole genre of writing. So it becomes very difficult to write a book that is broadly based. Why? Because it's important, okay, here's an example. Once upon a time, it was sufficient to write a memoir that was a Holocaust memoir. Well, not anymore. Yeah, you know what? You're not teaching today. I'm teaching today, so hush. So in the Holocaust memoir, The Escape Artist by Helen Fremont, she writes about her family. Sorry, I do have four-legged doorbells. She writes about her family who had escaped the Holocaust, but had pretended to be Christian. On top of that, the father was, how shall I say, he was kind of, the women in this family were very strong. He kind of was oppressed by his wife and eldest daughter. The eldest daughter was possibly a psychopath who was trying to get her younger daughter either to harm or maim her, or to get her to commit suicide. And this is the basis of The Escape Artist, which was written by Helen Fremont, who had previously written a Holocaust memoir about her family. And this book not only referenced that Holocaust memoir about her family, but how it destroyed her family's lives, at least in their oppression, and they cut her out of the family. So we're talking the basic Holocaust memoir with family dysfunction, with psychopathic older sister. So that's where memoir is now. How many of you have read or seen the movie The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls? Okay, so a classic example of commercial successful memoir turned into a book. Basically, this is a woman raised by parents who were incredibly irresponsible, and the child starts with the writer starts with the image of I was 3 years old and I was on fire. And we meet her, and she's cooking hot dogs by the stove. She's wearing a pink tutu, and she's standing on like a folding stool. And she's cooking hot dogs at 3 years old, and she's chatting with her mother's painting in another room, painting on a canvas. And we begin to realize she never accuses her parents of being anything irresponsible, but they were. So if you want to read classic memoir that is commercially successful and is accessible, and anybody could write The Glass Castle if they had those experiences. It's not, it is literary, but it's not what I would call high tone literary. Jeanette Walls wrote page 6 for the Post. I think it's the Daily Post. It was a gossip column. So that's a really good example to look at. So that is traditional publishing. Traditional publishing wants the niche book, whatever you want to call it. And they are also very narrowly focused. I'll just be totally frank with you right now. I'm going to put a big old pin in your bubble of I'm going to write the next bestseller. Right now, the tables have turned. And if you are a woman of a certain age, white, middle class, unless you have done something crazy or have slept with multiple members of the Rolling Stones, or you have some bizarre true crime background where you've solved a million cases and you're married, oh, by the way, secretly married to Brad Pitt, you're probably not going to get a book deal. That ship has sailed. Right now, what I'm seeing is over and over again, agents are looking for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color voices. And if you are a big fan of Twitter or anything, hashtag own OWN voices. That's because stories that have been told by very creative individuals who did not happen to come from that background, and they were telling stories, now own voices indicates the author telling the story is of that background. So that's the current state of publishing. Most agents are not looking for memoir or creative nonfiction from white women trying to tell stories other than their own. It is a fact. And so you have to think, okay, so how am I telling my story somewhat differently? So this is where I'll give you examples. Anyone's read the book by Stephanie Land called Made or seen the Netflix series? Do you know, are you familiar with it? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show this to you because Stephanie Land basically wrote an article. It was a first-person essay for an online site called Vox. So let's take a quick look at that. Let me call this up on my screen because it will help for you to see how you might be writing a story that would attract a readership. Okay. So one of the things is this is considered more commercial than literary. Vox is not a literary magazine. Vox is an online outlet, much like Slate, Salon, or any of these places. Vox tends to do a lot of investigative journalism. Vox is probably more pitched to, let's say, millennials rather than folks our age. So let's take a look at Vox. All right, so this is Stephanie Land's piece. And literally, she wrote a piece and it went viral to the point at which an agent contacted her and said, hey, I think you've got a book in you. And she ended up writing the book Made. So this is the headline. I spent 2 years cleaning houses. What I saw makes me never want to be rich, by Stephanie Land. So she wrote it, published 2015. Then the book came out 3 years later, and now there's a Netflix series. The series is Andie MacDowell plays the mother who is bipolar. Andie MacDowell's daughter plays the Stephanie Land character. This is creative nonfiction. This is Stephanie Land's true story. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it to you aloud. Let me tell you something you already know. Your housekeeper spies on you. We work alone. We get bored. What do you expect? I worked for a company cleaning houses for 2 years. It was flexible. It paid well enough. I didn't think of it as a career or identify it. It was just what I did to get myself through college as a single mom. At first, I didn't snoop. When they sent me off on my own with a white binder containing directions for each house, I just dropped my daughter off at a daycare and went. I found the houses on little winding roads, the hidden keys tucked under gnomes or rugs. I parked my car where it wouldn't drip oil on their driveway, lugged my tray of supplies inside, and called to clock in, standing by picture windows overlooking the ocean, looking at the perfectly manicured lawn, the chairs around the deck, the path down to the dock, and the boat that glittered even in the rain. I cleaned and I moved on. I had 20 clients and 2 or 3 houses a day to get to anyway. But after a few months, my boss told me to clean slower. We didn't call it that, of course. We called it more detailed. The company had a high turnover rate, she explained. We billed by the hours. If I cleaned houses quicker than the girl who'd replaced me. Clients would want to continue paying the lower rate. So I started looking through piles of paper instead of straightening them. And I'm going to stop it there. How many of you would continue to read? Why? Can you say why? Thoughts?
It's intriguing.
Go ahead, speak up.
It's intriguing. It's fascinating.
It's
What?
intriguing.
You want to know what she found.
You
Yeah.
want to know, yes, but also too, part of it is, I've had a cleaning woman in my home. I wonder what she's seeing in my stuff. So the thing is, this is really what memoir is about. It is about Stephanie Land cleaning houses, but it's how it lands with the reader, making the reader feel better or worse about themselves, making the reader curious to go on. Memoir, even though it is about our lives, is more interesting when the reader herself finds some sort of peg that they say, oh, this is, she can hang her own stories from the pegs in the book that give the story purpose to her. I mean, we're all intrigued by a good story, and a good story has conflict. A good story has mystery. I mean, you know what? Good stories are not about weddings where the bride walks down the aisle in a beautiful dress and throws the bouquet and it's caught perfectly and the food is good and everyone dances and we go home. There's no conflict there. We want to see drama. We want to see conflict. So that is Stephanie Land. So if you have Netflix, I would say crack open your Netflix queue and add Made, because the other thing is, it's not just Stephanie Land cleaning houses. What it is she's with an abusive man and has a young child, and he beats her up, and she finally says, I've had enough. But she has no skills whatsoever. So she takes her 3-year-old daughter and she tries to find work, and she finds work as a maid for one of these cleaning services. But obviously she can't take the child. So what does she do? She keeps trying to find a friend to babysit. She's only going to be gone 6 hours. She doesn't want to do it. She takes the child to her mother, and you see the mother living in this really kind of fancy trailer, and she's got this young boyfriend, and she's dressed beautifully, and she's painting, and she's laughing, and she's chatting, and she's talking. And you realize later on, as the story progresses, that the mother is bipolar, and when the mother loses interest in the child, she would just literally leave her on the side of the road. I mean, that's what it is. And we find the character sleeping in a ferry terminal overnight because she needs to be warm, because she can't keep running the engine in her car. She has no home. And so what this has to do with is domestic violence. It has to do with people living paycheck to paycheck, minimum wage. So it's a discussion of class. And it's also takes place in a resort community where wealthy people come and have homes by the ocean and are only there for a few months a year. So it's not just a woman cleaning houses. So again, remember when I said the Holocaust story and then the dysfunctional family and then the psychopathic older sister? This is why Made clicked, because it was an entry point to a lot of issues that, and also too, this woman puts herself through college, because she didn't have a college degree, by cleaning houses. And then what does she start to do? She starts to take creative writing classes, and that's how she gets the story written. So it's a really terrific story. Okay, so there's another story that I want to draw your attention to, and I'm going to call this up. And then, again, I don't know if you've seen this. I mean, again, I realize I am an oddball because I have such a focus on what the contemporary stories are that are hitting everybody. Does anybody remember reading a story about a woman who was a cable installer, and she, again, like Stephanie Land, had seen the worst of the worst? So that was written by a woman named Lauren Howe, or Howe, Hough. She published it in Huffington Post, and again, she had the story published, and an agent contacted her, and she ended up getting a book deal. So we're going to quickly take a look at that story. And the story is right here. So I was a cable guy. I saw, where did it go? No, participants could see my application. That's nice. I was a cable guy. I saw the worst of America, a glimpse of the suburban grotesque featuring Russian mobsters, Fox News rage addicts, and a cage man in a sex dungeon, and Dick Cheney. Lauren Howe on assignment for HuffPost. She wrote this and it was published in 2018. She got a book deal and published a book of essays within, well, actually for her, it was a problem because she couldn't write long form, and she was very much on a public forum talking about this. So she says, I can't tell you about a specific day as a cable tech. I can't tell you my first customer was a cat hoarder. I can tell you details, sure, that I smeared Vicks on my lip to try to cover the stench of rugs and walls and upholstery soaked in cat piss, that I wore booties not to protect the carpets from the mud on my boots, but to keep the cat piss off my soles. I can tell you the problem with her cable service was that her cats chewed through the wiring, that I had to move a mummified cat behind the television to replace the jumper, that ammonia seeped into the polyester fibers of my itchy blue uniform, clung to the sweat in my hair, that the smell stuck to me through the next job. So, and then she says, but what was the next job? This is the stuff I can't remember. How a particular day unfolded. Maybe the next job was a Great Falls, Virginia housewife who answered the door in some black skimpy thing I never really saw because I worked very hard at eye contact when faced with out of contact nudity. She was expecting a man. I'm a 6-foot lesbian. If I showed up at the door in a uniform with my haircut and what's known to barbers as international lesbian option number 2, you might mistake me for a man. Everyone does. She was rare in that she realized I'm a woman. We laughed about it. She found a robe while I replaced her cable box. She asked me if I needed to use a bathroom, and I loved her. So Lauren goes on to talk about the fact that it's tough to be a woman cable installer. Why? Because you're measured by how many jobs you do, how much time you spend there, and your transfer time in between. Well, obviously, if you're installing cable all day, you need to go to the bathroom. If you're a man, what do? I won't name names, but probably as several of you could tell, you can stand by the side of the road with your door open and take care of business. As a woman, you can't. So this impacted her job. But again, she got very specific. And would you continue to read that story? Was that intriguing and interesting to you? Yeah. So the thing about all these stories is that they have voice. They have very strong voice. But I do want to say this. Huffington Post and Vox are commercial ventures. They are many of them combine news stories. And that would be one means to find a traditional publisher. The other means, which probably more of you are familiar with, is to go the route of the literary magazine. So the literary magazine is Sewanee Review. Oh my gosh. Guernica, Tin House used to publish, and everybody loved Tin House, but now they no longer publish literary magazine. They're just a press. Oh my gosh. I know the more experimental ones because I teach those forms. There's Diagram, there's Booth, but oh gosh. Well, you know what? Most of us probably, if you're in the literary world, you've probably heard of the Paris Review. So here's an interesting story. This is actually a story that went viral for them. Does anybody read the Paris Review routinely, or have you read the story, The Crane Wife? Does that ring a bell for anybody? That was very successful for the Paris Review. It went viral. So I'll show you this and you'll see that there's a slight difference. The Paris Review is a much revered literary publication. So you'll see the tonality, the writer's voice in this is very different. Oh, let me call it up first. So this was written by C.J. Hauser, and she actually is a creative writing professor at Colgate. Yeah, that's Colgate. So we'll take a look at this one very quickly. And there we go. So The Crane Wife by C.J. Hauser, July 6, 2019. Again, this went viral and it was a very successful article for them. 10 days after I called off my engagement, I was supposed to go on a scientific expedition to study the whooping crane on the Gulf Coast of Texas. Surely I will cancel this trip, I thought, as I shopped for nylon hiking pants that zipped off at the knee. Surely a person who calls off a wedding is meant to be sitting sadly at home, reflecting on the enormity of what has transpired and not doing whatever it is I'm about to be doing that requires a pair of plastic clogs with drainage holes. Surely I I thought, as I tried on a very large and floppy hat featuring a pull cord that fastened beneath my chin, it would be wrong to even be wearing a hat that looks like this when something in my life has gone so terribly wrong. 10 days earlier, I had cried and I had yelled and I'd packed up my dog and driven away from the upstate New York house with 2 willow trees I had bought with my fiance. 10 days later, and I didn't want to do anything I was supposed to do. I went to Texas to study the whooping crane because I was researching a novel. In my novel, there were biologists doing field research about birds, and I had no idea what field research actually looked like. And so the scientists in my novel drafted things like shuffle around great stacks of paper and frown. The good people of the Earthwatch organization assured me I was welcome on the trip and I would get to participate in real science during my time on the Gulf. But as I waited to be picked up by my team in Corpus Christi, I was nervous. I imagined everyone else would be a scientist or birder and have daunting binoculars. So as you can see, I'm sure, I suspect, being Wells, women and men, more of us would read that piece. Why? A little more literary, a little more polish. It felt a little less tawdry, right? So that really is the difference between commercial creative nonfiction and literary creative nonfiction. Commercial creative nonfiction tends to go for the jugular. I mean, it's like, I clean your house or I install your cable. Whereas literary nonfiction, a woman's marriage is breaking up. Oh, and she's a novelist and she's trying to write a piece about biologists studying the whooping crane. So as you can see, if you were to go that route, then you publish in literary magazines. So I recently reviewed a book for Publishers Weekly. I will not talk about the book because I didn't give it a good review. I don't know what my editor has done with my notes. I write 225 words so she can cut it down to 200, but I give her like 3 to 6 pages of notes on what I thought about the book, in which I'm incredibly candid. This is an interesting example because this book has 20 chapters, but as you'll see when I open up the page, you'll see a portion of this appeared in blah, blah, blah. So there were 7 different literary magazines that this author published pieces of her book in. And again, how did she get a book deal? Because she went the literary magazine route. She had pieces published. When she probably shopped around for an agent, she found an agent who said, yeah, this look good. I like those pieces. But the interesting thing about this book is that, well, I'll show you. Let me just find her. Let me find her. Oh, here it is. Okay. So, and now we can explain this because a lot of times people say to me, well, I don't want to write short pieces because what'll happen if I want to include them in my book? And you know what? That's perfectly fine. If you take a writing class with me, I'll explain what that's called. It's called First North American Serial Rights. But the gist of it is, I'll show you, this is the page opposite, behind the title page. So you can see what you do as an author is you claim where you basically state where your pieces have come from. So it says a portion of this book originally appeared in a slightly different form in 4th genre, explorations and nonfiction, literary, right? A portion of this book originally appeared in a slightly different form. That's the standard boilerplate, okay? A portion of this book originally appeared in a slightly different form in. So she's been published in 4th genre, Solstice, Sycamore Review, Woven Series, and Entropy Magazine, 805 Lit Plus Art, Crab Orchard Review, Post Road. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, this is where you get into trouble when you spend a lot of time publishing in literary magazines, because the tendency in literary magazines is often to use you. That is just the current way of writing. If you read a lot of literary magazines, you realize they're a little more experimental. So they use second person, you. It's usually addressed to a lover, a mother, an absent child, I don't know. And it's often written in present tense. Don't ask me why. It just happens to be the form that seems to be being taught a lot in MFA programs. So what happens is, in this particular book, I could absolutely see what was published in literary magazines. Why? Because it was written in present tense and the rest of the book was written in past tense. Why? Because the book's a memoir and we look back on our lives. We don't usually reflect on our life in present tense voice. I walk down the hall and see my mother. She's smiling at me, but there's a little crookedness to her smile. And I realize the tears are filling her eyes and running down her face. Okay, so in that case, it's present tense. It's happening in the moment. But memoir is typically written in past tense. Why? The events have happened and we are reflecting on them with our present day knowledge. So when you have 7 essays, which are slightly modified to fit your book, but they're not written together, you lack a cohesion in the book. And that's where writers get into trouble. If you write a lot of short form, it's very hard to write the longer form. There are very different rhythms to the work. So, but you can do it. So that would be the literary angle that you would take. And then finally, so that again, agent, publisher, and you publish. If you were to do self-publishing, there's one of 2 ways. You learn as much as you can and you do it cheaply and you figure out how to write HTML code so you can get it in ebook format and you load it up to Amazon and CreateSpace. You have to learn about the world of ISBNs and where you can get them. And there's a reason why you never go with a publisher who says, I'll buy the ISBN for you, because it's easier that way. The cardinal rule, if you were to self-publish, is you purchase the ISBN, you own the ISBN. ISBN is International, Standard Book Number? Yeah, ISBN. I don't remember, but you could Google it. The gist of it is, the ISBN is sort of like a barcode. It says that book is yours. And I know I've memorized the ISBN number from my forthcoming book, 100 Things to Do in Syracuse Before You Die. Why? Because I'm that kind of a crazy geek. But also too, weirdly, it has 2 addresses of the 2 former houses I've owned in Syracuse. Is that not weird? Is that not serendipitously crazy? Okay, so the individual who owns the ISBN is the individual who owns the contents of the book. There is an option. If you were to just say, I'm just going to write a book and upload it to CreateSpace on Amazon. If you don't know going into this what you're giving up the contents of your book, because the reality is, if you don't own the ISBN, Amazon owns the ISBN. If you go with a vanity publisher, like there are places that will publish your book like Lulu. I don't know if anybody's heard of Lulu, but you can pay somebody to publish your book, and you may pay anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000 to get your book in printed form. And they're going to charge you for editing. They're going to charge you for cover design. So that is the difference with traditional publishing. Will never charge you for anything. They make money off your book, and you as an author get royalties. Probably typically for any of us writing a book, I got 10% on the book, 100 Things to Do in Syracuse Before You Die. The book has a cover price of $17. So that sounds pretty good, right? Because if I get 10% of $17, I'll get $1.70 per book, right? No, you don't get 10% of the cover price. You get 10% of what's called publisher's revenue. How does a publisher get a book into Barnes and Noble or any of these other things? At well below half retail. So you're getting probably the publisher is selling the book at 42% of cover price. Barnes and Noble makes up that difference. So I'm getting 10% of 42% of a $17 book. If I sell a book at Barnes and Noble and I get 75 cents, I'd be really lucky, because I'm not going to see that. So you don't write books to make money. If you think that you're going to retire and write a book and make money, no, I'm probably going to break even on this book, because I have to spend a lot of money on a lot of things that have to do with promoting the book myself, because I'd like to get it out there. I built my own website. I got business cards. I'm going to have a freestanding one of those, signs that you can have. I'm not going to get foam core and have the book on the cover. I'm going to actually go to a display place, exhibit, and I'm going to get an exhibit stand and all that stuff. So anyway, you don't make money doing books. So the model though is Reedy Press did not charge me for anything. I was actually contacted by the publisher saying, we hear you're a Syracuse writer. Would you be interested in writing a travel book? We understand you've done travel pieces. Literally, that's what they did. They didn't give me an advance, but they didn't charge me anything for editing, for design, anything. So that is a traditional publisher. A vanity press will charge you for everything. In other words, they'll say, well, yeah, we'll look at the manuscript, but we want a reading fee. And they charge you for everything. A hybrid is a different form, and it has a little bit of traditional in it. You get royalties, but you will pay upfront to publish the book. But in the hybrid form, you're still submitting your manuscript, and the publisher has to think that it's viable. And you have to, for some hybrid presses, either pay upfront and pay for the book, or have a certain number of orders committed to you before they'll take your book to print. Has anyone heard of Finishing Line Press or published a book with Finishing Line Press? They publish poetry chapbooks. Finishing Line Press is a hybrid press, but they won't publish your book unless you commit to 200 sales in advance, and then they'll publish your book. And it has to be good enough. So, that was me just slamming through what to look for in contemporary memoir or creative nonfiction. I've tried to leave 5 minutes. I know, what a crazy whirlwind. And I don't even know if I've answered any of the questions that you came in with, but as I have hinted at, I am trying to do something with Wells College this summer and possibly teach an actual writing craft class to get you into the headspace where this is how you need to approach your work and this is what you need to do. Because as I said, you can go through literary magazines or you can try to pitch. So the article that you saw from Lauren Howe, I was a cable guy, and the article by Stephanie Land, I cleaned houses for a living, those were probably pitched to editors at those media outlets. So pitching tends to be more commercial. Submitting to a literary magazine tends to be more literary, but at a literary magazine, you will wait 6 months to up to 2 years to get an acceptance or a rejection, and they don't pay you. Whereas the pitched pieces will pay you maybe $200, maybe $500. And then finally, there we had, I talked about hybrid briefly and self-publishing. I'm just going to be totally honest with you. I am writing a book now about, because I am a snowbird here. I'm writing a book called Sea Change, which has to do with how every time I've been near the sea, growing up throughout my life, I've had these epiphanies, and it's sort of like a personal journey. It's a memoir. I'm only going to write, I'm a write a short book, 30,000 words. I am not going to try to find an agent. I am not going to try to find a vanity press. I'm literally going to self-publish, and I'm going to teach myself how to self-publish. Why? Because the tide is turning. And for anybody who's ever experienced music, I mean, there's services like Apple Music, Spotify, things like that, but also to artists today who are recording music, they upload to SoundCloud, they upload to Bandcamp. If you don't have a teenager in your house, you might not know this stuff. But the gist of it is, I believe that the publishing model is changing. I believe it's moving toward what Guy Kawasaki calls artisanal publishing. We will all learn to have access and do things beyond just upload a book to Amazon CreateSpace. I'm going to write books that I consider conversations with my readers. I will price them fairly at $4.99. If you wanted to buy a book, you might think, hey, I found Linda entertaining. I'm willing to plunk $49.99 for a book. The interesting thing with Amazon, unless they've changed the model, it used to be that books that were under $2.99, Amazon would get 60% and you get 40%. But if a book is priced $2.99 or higher, you get 60% of the sales and they get 40%. So it does behoove you to self-publish. And I didn't talk about it, but if you were a fiction writer writing in paranormal romance or teen fiction or fantasy or science fiction or particularly horror, Amazon ebooks is the way to go. People have made millions from them, but it's disposable writing. Anyway, there we go. 2 minutes left. I'll stick around for as long as you have questions for me. Any questions? Wow, I've left you stunned and quiet. Hey, Laurel Rowe Morris. Hi.
Hey, how are you? Sorry I was late, but I did not see the email about the new link. So I was trying the old link.
Okay.
I'm a retired librarian. So, we are looking at it from a whole different end of the spectrum. And it's really interesting now, the change in self-publishing and how it's regarded by those in the library field.
Right.
Because it used to be that would be a reason for us not to select a book if it was what we call a kitchen table book or a vanity press.
Yes.
And these other ways to self-publish that were kind of a hybrid, like you're talking about, they didn't really exist.
No.
It was either a vanity or it was a publisher. and it could be a very small publisher, sometimes a regional publisher, but we would take that more into account than we would somebody who just cranked it out on their, on their kitchen table.
Right.
So the other thing is a lot of libraries are also, though, finding ways to help people in their community to publish. Like
Yes.
our library has Biblioboard, and we encourage people to use that as a way to write and publish to a platform that other people can download and read. And my library even sponsored a short story contest every year,
Mhm.
and the winning person would get their book published by us and put on a shelf. And even if it was a tiny little plastic binder or something, just what a feeling of empowerment that
Yes.
gave to the winner was just a really cool thing in building that literary community.
All right. You know what? Very quickly, I realized I thought I had oh, here we go. I just want to show you someone who is a prolific self-publisher. And interestingly enough, he is a writing and rhetoric instructor at Syracuse University. I discovered a lot of resources through him. I think he does a very good job. So he's not interested, and I will say the same thing. If I write the book and self-publish it, when I write the book and self-publish it, I'm not going to be one of these people who buys mailing lists. I just want to have a conversation with you. If you want to engage with me and buy the book, fine, but I'm not going to try to go to my local library and say, here, put it on your shelves. Why? Because that's not. Sometimes I think just doing the work itself is sufficient. So I'm going to show you this. So this is by a man named Mark Bosquet. So he calls himself wordslinger. He writes in all sorts of genres. The man basically cranks out a book a month, but he's actually a pretty decent writer. So here he has, he calls this as genre fiction. He has the Spooky Lemon Mysteries. He imagined, do you remember Scooby-Doo? Well, imagine if Scooby-Doo and Daphne and all those kids and yeah. Imagine if this was a live action TV show and these were teens solving mysteries, and all of a sudden they grow up and the show is canceled. Spooky Lemon is the heroine of Scooby-Doo, and she goes back to her hometown where her parents have died and willed her their Victorian house, and there's some strange mystery going on and she has to solve it. He's also written a series of stories called The Bear at the Top of the Stairs, The Fox on Top of the Blocks. These are children's stories about a little girl who wakes up in a fantastic world. This is Gunfighter Gothic, and I'll just click through. The Gunfighter Gothic is the train where Jill dies, and you can see it'll go immediately to, and it says I purchased this item. So the train where Jill dies is a Gunfighter Gothic book 1. It's 1866. Jill Masters, a merchant's daughter, and Hannah Park, her servant, have left Boston for the American West. They're on the trail of Dotson Winters, Jill's kidnapped fiance, a man she doesn't love, but has agreed to marry to save her father's business. So, Mark is just interested in writing stories. And then there's The Haunting of Kraken Moor. It's sort of like a story about sea captains and a woman who has these terrible dreams in a mansion on an English moor. Anyway, a lot of times it's sufficient. Mark's not expecting to retire. He's not going to quit teaching writing and rhetoric at Syracuse University, but he enjoys writing fiction books and he self-publishes them. That is enough. If you just don't hound every one of your friends, because that becomes the annoying thing. Like I literally will not be saying, Mary Brustowitz, you better buy 100 Things to Do in Syracuse before you die, because I know Mary doesn't live in Syracuse. However, Mary, I know the woman is writing it for Rochester, and I keep saying she and I are going to collaborate on the Finger Lakes books. Anyway, so you have to decide what is it that you want to accomplish as a writer. There is no shame in self-publishing anymore. The shame becomes if you start to guilt your friends or give them your book at Christmas time or for Hanukkah, and it's like 101 ways to change your motor oil. And then, somebody is like, well, I don't have a driver's license, so I don't own a car. Don't be that kind of person. All right, there we go. Anything else? Yes, Una, I probably have to go, don't we?
No, actually, I have a question for you.
Hi,
Okay.
Una.
Hi, Laurel. I was wondering about like daily goals. Do you set yourself a particular number of words per day. And say for a book like Seascape, which you're planning, how long would it take you to write something like that?
So, I mean, there are people. So if you follow the online world, there's a guy named Jeff Goins who basically he keeps talking about writing books, but it's a Ponzi scheme. He gets other people to write books, and it's just a weird thing. There's a whole lot of people online who will tell you should be writing 1,000 words a day to 5,000 words a day. I will just say this, and this becomes the great difficulty. I run writing critique groups for writers, and they meet twice a month. I have taught writing classes since 2009, I think. Yeah. And 2010. And the thing that I've often seen in the writing classes at various places that I teach, I don't run them myself. I usually work through an outlet like Downtown Writers Center or Writers in the Mountains or Hobart Festival of Women Writers or stuff like that. The thing that I found is that people say, well, I'll take a 6-week writing class or I'll take an 8-week writing class. Why? Because it gets them to write. If you don't have any responsibility or obligation to write, you won't write. Oh, speaking of which, the writing, if you want to just get your feet wet and write, you can write to prompts, which are ideas or images or words. And I teach a very inexpensive prompt writing class at a place called Oasis, which is an online adult learning resource. You know what? Check with Una. You can get my email or go to lindalowen.com and email me through the website. I can send you a link to that. I'm teaching one right now, and there's another bunch that start in March. It's an easy entryway into writing, and I'm in very encouraging. So anyway, I bring this up because, all right. Go back to your question, Una, because I was starting to answer and then I diverted. Ask me that again.
Daily goals and how long?
Oh, daily goals. Okay. This becomes the problem because it's very hard to write something if you feel like, yeah, well, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not sure, or I think I want to, but I might want to do this. The thing about writing is, and I am a working writer. I write because somebody gives me an assignment, and at the end of the assignment, they dangle. This is not a hair tie. This is a paycheck. Okay. Pretend this is a paycheck, but they dangle the paycheck. So I typically write for Syracuse.com. I watch theater shows, and, I go and I watch a theater show and I come home at 10:30 at night. And, I may say, well, I'm going to start writing tonight. Or I may say, I'm going to get up at 7:00 tomorrow and I'm going to write tomorrow. But that piece is due between 1 and 2. So I'm going to write it because you know what? It's due. I have a deadline, and they're dangling the paycheck in front of me. The problem becomes when you yourself don't set goals. Like I got a tiny love story only because I set myself a goal that year. And if left to my own devices, I don't write and I don't submit things because I sooner move toward the paycheck that will pay me. However, I'll say this book that I wrote, 100 Things to Do in Syracuse Before You Die, it's a 160-page book. It has 100 items, and each of those descriptions had to be 130 words or less. This is right in my wheelhouse because I teach short form writing. I got the book contract signed middle to the end of June, and the book had to be delivered, the manuscript, October 1st. I knew that I wanted beta readers and I wanted to have the book done 2 weeks early. So end of June, July, August, middle of September. Basically, I had 100 days to write the book, and I wrote the book in 100 days. And I did set goals and I didn't meet them, or I wrote early drafts of each of these 100 things and they didn't quite work out. The reality is, if you know that you have a date and after this date, you'll just drop off a cliff and die, you'll meet those goals. I also read a lot about, time management and productivity hacks. And the reality is that you will do the work in the space you've identified to do the work in. So if you give yourself a year to write a book, it'll take you a year to write a book. If you decided you were going to write the book in 6 months, and typically in the world of nonfiction, you sell a book on spec with a book proposal and 3 sample chapters. And my friend, as I said, just scored a book deal. I've spoken to other writers. Publishing gives you 6 months to write a 75,000 word book. It's a killer. Most people cringe and say, I shouldn't have done this. What a major mistake, but they get the work done. It's helpful if you set goals. And that is really probably the reason why I encourage people to get involved with a local writing center or find an online writing community to be a part of, take classes, because when you get into the habit of writing, you will write. But the other most important thing is, as a writer, you want to be in a cohort of writers. Why? Because a class with me will only last 6 or 8 weeks. But if you're in a writing critique group, I mean, I run writing critique groups and they meet twice a month all year round. And it keeps them writing and keeps them writing and keeps them writing. And women have come into my groups who've said, well, I've never published anything before, and they've seen success. I mean, I can think of one woman who's writing for 3 years, joined my group, and in a year, she's had 6 pieces published because she's been dedicated. There's also many theories about the idea that when you write and when you have any sort of steady practice, meditation is clearly an example. You open a conduit. I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert, is that one who wrote Eat, Pray, Love? She wrote a book called Big Magic, and she says something, it sounds crazy, but I think there's some legitimacy to it. She says, ideas are floating out there in another plane, and then they manifest here or here or here. But if you don't act on an idea, the idea will, kind of move to somebody else. And that sounds wacky. But I remember when there was a movie that came out, 2 magician movies. One was called The Prestige, and another one had Ed Norton in it. Do you ever notice how things cluster, like certain books or ideas cluster? Why is that? Maybe Elizabeth Gilbert is onto something with Big Magic. Maybe ideas do manifest and they have some sort of sentience and they move from person to person. Because if you're not going to deliver for me, I'm going to go manifest in someone else. I don't know. I'm very woo as I get older. But yes, the short answer is, it is very helpful to set yourself small goals. That's why, I like to teach micro memoir, because anybody can write a 200-word story, a couple of them a week, not difficult to do. But no, like anything, if you don't have a plan, you don't have accomplishments. Everything can be figured out, but you have to break it down into steps. So, other questions? I don't want to keep you, and I know you need to go, but I will stay as long as you need me. Steph Batchelor, NYSDA, what's your question? Don't forget to unmute. Or are you saying goodbye?
She's saying goodbye.
Oh, goodbye. All right.
Bye,
Goodbye.
Linda, I
Stephanie.
have to go.
All right. Bye, Laurel.
Goodbye,
All right.
Laurel. So before you all go, we are
Mhm.
trying to get Linda in person at Wells for some classes in July. Keep an eye on A2A and Wells Notes, the websites. We are trying to work it out. Maybe during Randy's Book Arts Institute, if we get that flying as well. We have a lot of plans.
Oh,
And-
book arts.
And Marty, I'm so glad you're here. Marty's the originator of the concept of the Learning by the Lake. Randy took it and pivoted to the virtual mode. We have something that Marty's doing as well right after reunion, which we are planning to be in person. So just so you know. Thanks for joining us, Linda.
Oh, thank you. I know I am all over the place, but I appreciate your patience with me. I am too passionate about this world, too fascinated, because okay, so right now I'm going to give you the surefire secret to getting published. Okay. Write 1 million words. If you've written 1 million words, you are a writer. It's just a muscle that you're exercising, and talent is not going to be the thing that carries you through. It is perseverance. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. Do you know why Paul Giamatti is such a successful actor? Because I think he comes from so Julia Louise Dreyfus is the Dreyfus Fund, and Paul Giamatti's family is another fund. These people continue to act and act and act and act and act and act because they could afford to do it. You have to continue to write and write and write and write and write, regardless of rejection. Perseverance is the single thing that will get you a published story or book. Keep going no matter what. And that's it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.